In March 1939, a young Wyoming outlaw committed a series of crimes. It began with an elk poach and ended with a bank robbery. 7 men died, including the man himself. It all happened in a matter of days. It left families, neighbors, and friends shocked and confused. The effects of the terrors spread through the community. The events captured the nation's attention and the front pages of newspapers.
Earl Durand was a young Powell, Wyoming resident during the Depression who dreamed of living off the land as the mountain men had. From an early age, he taught himself to live with ease in the wilderness. He was a crack shot and could hit almost any target with a variety of weapons. He often poached animals to feed hungry neighbors.
One spring morning in 1939, he was arrested and jailed for poaching elk, resisting arrest, and killing a rancher's calf. He was sentenced to 6 months in jail for the poaching and awaited sentencing for the theft of the calf.
2 days later, he escaped the Cody jail by assaulting a deputy with a milk bottle he had been given with his dinner. He forced the deputy to drive him to his parents' home in nearby Powell. Durand shot and killed a different deputy sheriff and a town marshal in the driveway of his parents' home.
For 10 days, Durand eluded arrest by fleeing to the mountains. He killed 2 additional members of the sheriff's posse tracking him. Montana mobilized its National Guard armed with a mortar and a howitzer as Durand's escaped near the Wyoming-Montana border. The sheriff's posse attempted to drop tear gas from a plane on his last known position but failed to flush him out of hiding. But by then, he had already escaped by carjacking the posse's radio operator and forcing him to drive back to Powell.
Once in Powell, he went to rob the First National Bank. During the course of the robbery, he shot out the windows, which alerted the local residents. They took up their own arms to stop him from doing any more harm to the community.
Durand tied up the bank president and 2 other bank employees and forced them to walk out of the bank in front of him. One of the 3 hostages was shot and killed by a rain of citizens' bullets that met them at the door. Durand was returning their fire.
Meanwhile, in a gas station across the street from the bank, a 17-year-old high school student named Tipton Cox had sought refuge along with the crowd. Being closest to the doorway, he was passed a rifle by the gas station manager. The teenager fired on Durand when Durand aimed his rifle at him. The bullet hit Durand in the chest and knocked him off his feet. He crawled back into the lobby of the bank where he managed to shoot himself once in the neck. Within moments, the bank president was able to free himself and picked up Durand's rifle, walked into the bank, and shot Durand in the head.
The story was a sensation. Newspapers throughout the country portrayed Durand as a raw meat-eating wild man, an alliterative Tarzan of the Tetons, a mountain man Robin Hood bank robber who poached elk and deer to feed those in need, a young giant who was not only the biggest but also the best marksman, runner, and outdoorsman the West had ever known.
However, residents of Powell were stunned with the painful realities of these tragic events. Even 75 years after it all happened, there is just as much division over who this Earl Durand was, an honorable citizen who spiraled out of control when confronted with his insignificant poaching, or a selfish, irresponsible man who wanted the right to do whatever he wanted to do and was willing to kill other honorable men to do it.
Durand thought he was doing the right thing by killing animals to feed hungry families. Even though Wyoming had prohibited poaching for decades, Durand felt like he had a right to ignore the law in order to help his neighbors and satisfy his own desires. However, Tipton Cox and the other Powell residents felt like they had a right and a responsibility to defend themselves when Durand was being a danger. They thought they had the right to stop the outlaw, even if it meant killing him.
While people might have debated whether Durand's poaching was acceptable, no one would defend his killing of innocent people. The posse members pursuing him were fulfilling their responsibilities as best they could. Some died fulfilling those responsibilities. The Powell residents who had armed themselves felt they were exercising their rights while protecting themselves and their loved ones.
Some people have tried to justify Earl Durand's actions. You know, there is no justification for the murder. They've tried to justify the poaching. From the time settlers came into Wyoming, they decimated the wildlife population. There was lots of wildlife all over the Bighorn Basin. But by 1890s, the wildlife was disappearing. And it got so bad that in the 1890s, a group of ranchers in Meeteetse formed an association to try to protect wildlife. By the teens, major efforts were being made to reintroduce elk into the bighorns because they had been totally eliminated from the bighorns. So when Earl Durand comes along during the 1930s, Wyoming has been trying to preserve wildlife for 2 generations. And for him to believe that it was okay for him to poach because he was feeding people, as a society, we were way past that point. There were legal ways that he could hunt and feed the people he was feeding. Did Tipton Cox have the right and responsibility to shoot Earl Durand? I don't know if he had the right or the responsibility. Police were on the way. There were lots of people with guns. Somebody was probably going to shoot Earl Durand. Maybe if Tipton Cox did not shoot him, Earl Durand might have shot someone else. And I think that is probably the crux of that debate. Was Tipton Cox, by killing Durand, was he saving the life of someone else? If he was, then I believe he had a responsibility to do that. Certainly, the authorities believed that Tipton Cox acted appropriately because he was never prosecuted or he was praised for his actions.
He was very sorry that he had to do it, but he thought that he would end Earl Durand's shooting up and down the street and wounding people. So he felt he did the right thing, but he did not kill him. Earl Durand killed himself. Tip only wounded him, and they never ever said he killed him. He went to New York City. He met Cab Calloway. He was wined and dined because he bagged the Tarzan of the Tetons, and that was as big a story as Tiger Woods in its day.
I was in my teens before I knew the story. My dad never talked of it, and I actually heard it first from a guy I worked with in the oil field in Powell. When I asked Dad about it, he told me the story and said that he was not proud of what he had to do. Had to do is the correct term because he shot in self-defense. He and the other folks in Powell that day did not know it was Durand robbing the bank. They all thought he was trapped on the mountain. Dad said he knew Durand previously and had been ice skating with him. They were acquainted but not friends per se. Dad said when Durand stepped out of the bank, he saw Dad and was swinging the rifle his way when he fired. He had seen Durand shoot before and said Durand would not have missed. I never questioned Dad about it again.
It's not always easy being a citizen. We claim certain rights and privileges. We also have certain responsibilities. It's not always exactly clear where the boundaries are, how many rights we can claim, and how far our responsibilities extend. There's a lot of gray area. Our responsibilities as citizens, they boil down to the basic element. Are you contributing to society? Are you making it a better place? Maybe Tipton Cox can answer that question without reservation, that he was doing what he thought he had to do to make society a better place.
It has been 75 years since the story of Tipton Cox and Earl Durand, but its questions on rights and responsibilities are still significant today. People have wondered and will continue to wonder what our rights and responsibilities are as citizens. When chaos reigns and people begin to question themselves and their obligations, they will have to ask whether or not they want to make society a better place for everyone. When everyone accepts the rights and responsibilities as citizens, we can all truly be free spirits.